Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this virtual IndieFest event for Uzma Jalaluddin's Hannah Khan Carries On, which, as of today, is an instant national bestseller in Canada. Congratulations. My name is Alice, and I am a publicist at HarperCollins Canada. I'm so grateful to be working on this hilarious, heartwarming, and important book. In these challenging times, it's wonderful to have the opportunity to laugh. We are so pleased you could join us, and of course, thank you for supporting your local bookstore. Though connected virtually, we would like to acknowledge that our meeting is hosted on Indigenous land and Dish with One Spoon territory. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. HarperCollins Canada gratefully acknowledges these Indigenous nations for their guardianship of this land. We ask that you treat the presenter's work with respect and that your questions refrain from harassment of any sort. HarperCollins Canada strives to provide an event environment that is welcome and inclusive for both panelists and attendees. This evening will feature an interview between Uzma and fellow author Asma Zahanak Khan, followed by a Q&A. You can pop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom center of your screen. Some information about our presenters this evening. Uzma Jalaluddin is the author of Aisha at Last and Hannah Khan Carries On. A high school English teacher, she is also a Toronto Star columnist, a contributor to The Atlantic. Her first novel was published in the US, the UK, Australia, and India, and was optioned for film by Amy Pascal and Sony Pictures. Asma Zahanak Khan holds a PhD in international human rights law with a specialization in military intervention and war crimes in the Balkans. She is a former adjunct law professor and editor-in-chief of Muslim Girl magazine, the first magazine targeted to young Muslim women in North America. She is also the award-winning author of The Unquiet Dead and The Bloodprint, the first book in the Khorasan archives. A British-born Canadian, Khan now lives in Colorado with her husband. I'd like to turn things over to Asma now. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the event. Over to you, Asma.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Alice. And Uzma, congratulations. You are a national bestseller in Canada. Tell us what that feels like.
Thank you so much, Uzma, and thanks for offering to moderate today. I'm so thrilled. I can't even tell you how much this means to me, to feel like I'm so supported by my home country, my fellow readers in Canada. So a big thank you to everyone who bought a copy of Hannah Khan Carries On. I can't believe that a book that looks like this with a hijabi character on the cover with a name like Hannah Khan is now a bestseller in Canada. I can't stop smiling. I'm just going to be grinning like a fool for this entire.
Well, if anyone ever deserved it, it was you. It's very well deserved. But tell us a little bit about what it's like now to be promoting a second book versus a debut novel. Are you a different writer now?
Yeah, I feel like I am. I mean, my first book I wrote in, it came out in 2018. And they say for your first novel, you basically have your entire life to write it, right? Because up until the point that you actually write and publish the book, you have all of that time. And then for my second novel, I felt like there was a shorter window of time that I had to kind of, produce something, come up with an idea, polish it. And then, of course, my first novel did well. And so I had a little bit of expectation, right? Like, so what is my second book going to be about? Is it going to be in the same vein? But I'm thrilled with the way that it turned out. I feel so proud and protective of my second novel. I hope people pick it up. It's hilarious and funny, and has a lot of food descriptions, which is not very helpful because I'm fasting right now, but
Right. It's the holy month of Ramadan, and Uzma and I are both fasting, and we thought, oh, let's add a few challenges like doing book promotion during this time. Easier for me because I still have 3 hours to go, but Uzma has to break her fast sometime during this event. So we'll keep our eye on that. So for those who may not have read your funny and delightful romance with serious themes, Hannah Khan Carries On has been described as You've Got Mail in competing halal restaurants. And your first novel, Aisha at Last, was pitched as a Muslim Pride and Prejudice. So what that tells me is that you're interested in retellings and possibly also that you love Jane Austen and rom-coms. So why do you think they work so well in your case? And why did you want to write one?
It's such a good question. I'm a child of the 90s, so I think my love of rom-coms comes from that classic era of all those amazing romantic comedies that came out at that time, like Notting Hill and You've Got Mail and While You Were Sleeping and all the other ones. And I just fell in love with the way that they told the story. I watched them over and over, and I would swoon. And of course, Asma, you and I both love just reading romance novels in
We
general,
do.
right? Like
We're addicted.
they're
They
addictive.
are addictive.
They are addictive and they're so much fun. And I know you do this as well with your fiction. But for me, the happily ever after, which is the main ingredient of the romance novel. I know you, Asma, you write mysteries and you write fantasy fiction, but we always try to include something else in the layer of that storytelling. So for me, my novels will be funny and light and humorous, and they'll have really hilarious jokes and interesting characters. But at the heart of Hannah Khan Carries On, it's really a novel about family and identity and sort of some of the darker issues that Hannah faces as a visible Muslim woman living in Toronto. So I feel like romantic comedies sometimes can be very, very light, but the ones that I really love are often at their heart about something a little bit more serious. And that's what I try to do with my writing as well.
So let's talk then about what the serious themes in this particular novel are. And I think that you, like me, we are writing, of course, for a broad audience, but we're always also writing for our communities and trying to tell stories that they don't often see about themselves, and getting deep into the authenticity of what it is like to live as a Muslim woman in Muslim communities that are very diverse and very unexpected. So the serious themes that I see in your book, really, the underlying theme is kind of a thread of continuity in your work, is the underlying theme of Islamophobia. And it can go from the very casual, such as the kinds of things that Hannah's boss might say to her when she's trying to pitch ideas for a podcast, to very serious incidents, such as hate groups targeting a community food festival. And one of the things that I find so interesting and inspiring about your work is how you manage to draw that into something as light as a romantic comedy or a romance. And I always think as a writer that must be a very hard balance to strike. So 2 questions. 1, why do you write about these themes? 2, how do you strike the balance?
Okay, great questions. So why do I write about these things? I think I write about them because growing up, I never saw them represented. I never participated in having these conversations happening on the page or on the screen in any way, shape, or form. And so many readers have reached out to me and said that, I read your book and I felt seen. I read your book and something very similar like that happened to me. Thank you for sharing these stories. And sometimes they're Muslim and sometimes they're not. Maybe they're a person of color. They come from a marginalized, racialized background. But for so long, I'm speaking from my own personal experience as the daughter of immigrants from India, as someone who is South Asian, someone who's visibly Muslim who wears hijab. I feel like I was always kind of left out of the conversation, and so I knew that when I started writing my books, it's almost hard for me to just write a straight up romance. And I love, uncomplicated romances. I think they're so much fun. But this might be something that, maybe we can dive into a little bit, like the weight of being from a particular background and knowing that our stories have never made it into the mainstream. I feel like it's my responsibility and also my privilege to be able to talk about these really serious issues. But I also want my reader to come away from my books feeling hopeful and happy. I've written 2 books. They're both romances. There is a happily ever after in both of them. The guy gets the girl, they kind of go off into the sunset, and that's important too, because quite frankly, I think that brown people need more romance in their lives, not physically in their life, because I think in their real life, they do have plenty of romance, just like any other community. But we need to see ourselves in these stories that have romance in them, that have love and are hopeful, and that kind of focus on like the funnier, lighter aspects of our lives. We just don't see that I would say we don't see that in the English language so much as we do in I'm sure there's lots of stories that are written and set in Pakistan that are very, very funny and very happy, but we don't see that here in Canada and the United States. So that's who I'm writing for. I'm writing for 24-year-old Uzma, who was a voracious reader and still is a voracious reader, but never got to really see any of issues that struck close to home. And I forgot what your second question was.
So my second question was, it's quite a skill, a talent to and on the one hand have Hannah swooning over the very swoon-worthy Aiden in one scene and watch this really intimate, romantic, deeply personal connection form between two characters on the page, and then maybe laugh at their little jealousies or their misunderstandings or the sheer comedy of, let's say, Hannah's cousin every time he's in a scene with the two of them, which he completely steals, and then go from that to a scene where you've got scary people that we've seen, such as the kinds of insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol in the United States, for example, but scary people like that coming to your harmless community food festival and letting you know in these very violent and frightening ways that you're not welcome and that you don't belong. And as a writer or an artist, that's a difficult transition to make and still feel tonally it's the same book. So what goes into the process of putting that on the page?
Oh my God. Well, Asma, you know this because you read so many drafts of this book.
All of which I loved.
Thank you. I'm a drafter, and I know that every single draft sort of lays the foundation for one thing, and then it builds on in the next draft. So like in the first draft, maybe I'll focus on the character of Hannah or the character of Aiden, and then in another draft, I'll try to tease out what the best ending will be for a book like this. But the balance comes from, I honestly think it's because we're living this life, right? Like I'm living a life where I am enjoying my life. I'm pursuing joy. I'm trying to be hopeful and optimistic, even though Ontario is in a third wave lockdown. So horrible, so frustrating. And at the same time, when I leave my home, I'm always really aware of I'm a visible Muslim woman walking down these streets, and I have to be aware of who's around me. Who's maybe coming a little bit too close to me, who's speaking to me, and yet so that balance happens in my life on a daily basis. And so I guess at heart, even though I try to pretend I'm a hardened cynic, I guess I'm an optimistic person and I'm a romantic person. And I believe in love. I believe that things will hopefully, inshallah, end up better than they are tomorrow than they are today. And I want everyone who reads my book to know that hard things happen to all communities, and to maybe learn a little bit more about the hard things that specifically affect Muslims, specifically affect South Asians, but to know that in the end, we can laugh, we fall in love, and we hope for happy endings too.
And we're still standing at the end of the day.
Yes.
I remember we were having a conversation maybe a year ago or that might have been 2 years ago, and you told me that you and your family were contemplating a visit to the United States, and we were at the peak of Trumpism over here. And I wanted to say, don't come because you wear hijab, but there's plenty of hijab wearing Muslim women in the United States too. And then my second piece of advice was, don't go anywhere on your own. Don't separate from your family. Try not to make your hijab as gorgeously styled as it is today, where you stand out in a crowd, but rather try to blend in, use a hat, use whatever you can use. So these are the things that we're doing all the time, the weight that we're carrying, and we carry it in our personal lives. Is it a weight to put that in your writing too? Is that a burden you wish you didn't have, that you were just writing these fun, frothy, two gorgeous people meet and fall in love and sort out their issues along the way?
I feel like in my first novel, Aisha at Last, I had a very visible Muslim man, Khalid, who faced a lot of very obvious Islamophobia in his workplace. And then my second novel, I dove even further into it. It's funny you mentioned that conversation, Asma, because I remember that conversation so clearly. And I actually did take your advice. I bought a beanie, like one of those slouchy hats, and like a big like blanket scarf, I guess. And there's some pictures of me from the Grand Canyon, and that instead of a hijab, I'm just basically wearing a hat and wearing the scarf around my neck. And I was so aware of the people around me when I was on that trip, because Trumpism was just reaching its peak. This was 2000. I want to say it was 2017, and it's funny because that was when I started writing Hannah Khan Carries On. And the earlier drafts of Hannah Khan Carries On really reflected that in a way that some of the scenes did make it to the final cut, but they were very angry. And I think I in drafts and later drafts, I sort of toned it down a little bit, brought in a lot more of the optimistic storytelling. For instance, Hannah Khan's aunt Kokab and her cousin Rashid, who you alluded to earlier, really bring a lot of the lightness into the story. But Hannah herself is struggling with so many things over the course of the story. And I think it's because I was struggling with a lot of those same ideas and challenges during the drafting of the story. I don't know if I don't know what it would be like not to struggle with those things, because it's my lived reality. It's not something that I'm exploring and then I can kind of take that hat off and then just, pretend to not be a visible Muslim woman. This is who I am. I do think that both of my first two novels really took a nosedive into, just exploring themes of the person within. Sort of, sorry, this is Ramadan brain that you're seeing right now, by the way. I'm like,
You need
wait,
a date and some water.
I need
That's what you
some
need.
No, so what I was saying is it's not I have a feeling that my third novel might focus more on just self-reflection as opposed to thinking too much about the outside world. I think I might, now that I feel like I've kind of cleared the cobwebs in my brain, like I've kind of almost made some space in my mind now that I've actually dealt with some of these issues that plague and affect Muslim readers, that maybe my third book I'll have the freedom to try to write about something else.
Mhm.
Probably not, though.
Well, I can confirm that because 10 books in, I'm still talking about that. And one of the conversations we've had, as I'm sure many other marginalized communities have, Black communities, Latinx communities in the United States, we talk about where to put the rage we feel at these daily injustices. And I'm always talking about one of these days I'm going to write my rage book, as if the other books don't include rage. But one of the things you try to do as a writer is not put your perspective across it. This is my rage, but you create situations and you develop characters where you want the reader to think that you want the reader to walk away from the story feeling outraged. The outrage that you felt has now moved on to someone else whose eyes have been open to the story that you're telling, which I think is a good way of distancing it. Is that a trick that you find effective too?
I never thought of it in that way, but you're absolutely right. Because here I constructed the character of Hannah as someone she's so sparky and feisty. And I kind of describe her as being a little bit of a brat. Like she does certain things just to bug her older sister and just to kind of like bug her brother-in-law in very much a younger sister bratty kind of way. And I love that about her, but I was never like that. Like Hannah Khan is nothing like me. Especially at 24, I was a much more serious, shy, reserved type of person. And yeah, I think constructing her in this way and then having her find her voice, be put into these situations where she has to kind of grow up really fast. And she has this uncanny ability, and I think that's why you pointed this out in earlier drafts, where she doesn't feel sorry for herself, or when she doesn't allow her self-pity to just overtake her sense of self. She picks herself back up and she's very, very resilient. And who is not going to cheer for a character like that, who just keeps going, even though literally her entire life is on fire? Every single aspect of her life is on fire, but she just keeps going. She just really believes in herself. And she has, and where that strength comes from is from her community. So she has a very close family relationships. She has immense loyalty to her family. She's trying to help her family survive as they're struggling in this restaurant battle that they're in with the new restaurant that opened up down the street. But she's also so sure of the path that she has taken. She wants to be a broadcaster. She starts this podcast at the very beginning of in fact, the book opens up with the transcript from her very first episode of an anonymous podcast where she just kind of, it's like a diary where she talks about her experiences as a young Muslim woman growing up in Toronto. And throughout the entire book, you see Hannah grow into this character who you just want to root for, you're cheering for. You want her to succeed.
And make smart choices that land her the handsome guy at the end.
Oh, yeah.
So we've gone deep. Now let's go light. You've talked about Hannah's life being on fire, but a different kind of fire comes in the form of this well-dressed, smooth-talking, incredibly handsome and debonair gentleman who's the scion to this rich dynasty, and he's opening up a restaurant to compete with Hannah's. But he's into Hannah, and he makes no secret of that, despite this, rivalry that they're going to develop throughout the course of the book. So tell us about Mr. Swoonworthy Aiden and make it good.
Yeah, so Aiden Shaw is the Tom Hanks character to Hannah Khan's Meg Bryan. So because I was trying to follow the You've Got Mail model, and Aiden is in his late 20s. He has this dream to open up a restaurant. He's actually very interesting because his backstory is the opposite of Hannah's. he doesn't come from a very strong family or community. His mother died when he was very young. He was raised by this autocratic father, and he's been groomed to sort of take over the family business. They're a family of industrialists, so like business tycoons who take over companies and kind of sell them and do various things with them. And Aiden at one point in the story tells Hannah, I want to build something that lasts. I want to build something that means something to a community. And he sort of stumbles into the fictional neighborhood, which is set in Scarborough in Toronto, that I've named the Golden Crescent neighborhood. So it's Crescent, and it was just a little joke. We always have to put little jokes into our books, right, Asma? Because they keep us going as we keep writing.
Easter eggs.
Yeah, the Easter eggs, right? So Crescent because I'm a Muslim writer, and then Golden because why not? So so the Golden Crescent neighborhood, and he's there to be serious. He wants to prove himself as a restaurateur. And his restaurant style is so different from Hannah Khan's family. So Hannah Khan runs a sort of Indian, very divey, hole in the wall, delicious food, but not beautiful decor type of restaurant. The kind of restaurants that I grew up eating at, the only ones that really did serve halal meat when I was younger. And then he has this sort of what I'm terming, he opens up like a hipster halal restaurant with like a retro diner, artisanal milkshakes, poutine and burgers and ribs and like all that kind of stuff.
I just want to tell you that I never want to hear the term hipster halal again after I read your book. That should not enter the lexicon.
In the same way that biryani poutine is going to enter the lexicon. Yeah, so he's and right away him and Hannah sparked, because I love the enemies to lovers trope. It's one of my favorite tropes in romance. And they're both very territorial. They're both very loyal to their vision. Hannah's loyal to her family restaurant, and she starts to fight a little bit dirty against Aiden. She starts spreading rumors about him. And in the beginning, he's very gruff and grumpy, but there's an undeniable attraction between the two of them.
And sure. And also the fact that he's come in trying to prove himself and establish this restaurant, but boom, he sees the girl, and suddenly that's all he can really think about is how can he ingratiate himself with her while at the same time eviscerating her family business.
Exactly. It's the classic tension in a rom-com, right? It was so fun to write banter between the two of them because while they're face to face, they have to pretend that they hate each other, even though there's this deepening attraction that happens. And one of the things about Hannah and Aiden is that they actually turn, it's not insta love. They actually become friends first. And the friendship sort of spans the whole length of the book. And then it isn't until the very end that they, admit their feelings for each other. But then the other interesting aspect of this is that it is You've Got Mail. So little do they know they've actually already been friends online. So Hannah, as I mentioned before, has an anonymous podcast, and Aiden's character, he writes under a pseudonym, basically is her number one fan, and they communicate over this podcast. So yeah.
Which is a great device because the banter in those scenes is also really good. I remember Uzma and I are each other's critique partners, so I remember going through early drafts and reading the banter in the podcast and just absolutely dying and putting in little comments saying, "Please, more of this! I love this so much. You can't stop here." It's one of my favorite things to read in fiction, particularly in romance. But let's talk about family a little bit more since you've mentioned that. I'm really interested in having our readers here or our audience here about how Hannah's family's past contains a mysterious secret, and through that secret come a lot of life lessons for Hannah that are very important as a catalyst in terms of what she decides to do with her future. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have to backtrack a little bit. Hannah has mysterious relatives come and visit from India. So her Kokab Khala is Urdu for mother's sister, and Rashid, her cousin Rashid, comes to visit. And Rashid was an expected visitor. Kokab Khala just kind of showed up without telling anyone. And she's actually Hannah's mother's older cousin. So an older cousin, so Hannah's sort of aunt. And she is a fascinating character who's actually based on a real life person. So I have someone in my own family who I don't want to give any spoilers, but is very similar, behaved very similarly to the way that Coca-Cola behaves. But she, in terms of personality, she's a sarcastic, acerbic character who is constantly pushing Hannah, even, to stand up for herself, to continue to pursue her dreams, and keeps asking Hannah, like, why aren't you already, behaving in this way? Why are you giving up? You need to, at one point she tells her, you have such a gullible face. You have to learn how to lie better. This is how you learn this is how you should lie better. And later on, when she reveals a really important story, Hannah is so inspired by that story of the way that Coca-Cola behaved when she was younger, when she was basically put into a situation where her agency, her sense of control over her own life was being taken away from her. And she decisively acted in a way that really inspired Hannah decades later. And I included this story because, again, this is based on a family myth. So it's a family story of my great aunt, someone I never met, who grew up in the 1940s and 1950s in India. And I included it. I was paying homage to this family mythology. We all have family mythology, but this one in particular, because I just think, like, there's so many stereotypes, particularly about Asian women being submissive and not being able to stand up for themselves, or just kind of accepting whatever fate is, their male relatives hand down to them. And I wanted to really push back against that by showing, look, here's this woman who's older, who is so strong and so fierce and has been her entire life. And women like that exist not just in North America, but all around the world. And look at the wonderful things they've done. Did I answer your question? I don't even know.
No, you did. You absolutely did. And you also gave me the grounds for a new question, which was one of the things that I find interesting about Coca-Cola, though you don't come right out and say it, is what she's teaching Hannah about a little bit is ambition, how it's all right to have dreams for yourself and then to be single-minded about pursuing those dreams. And that's something that you and I have talked about growing up in South Asian communities. We're both from the Toronto area originally. And we're both what we call Desi, from the homeland. Our parents are from the homeland. And so we've grown up with a certain specific set of cultural expectations and career expectations, that there's certain careers that you follow and certain careers would be great, but you're the children of immigrants. And it's important that you have some kind of security in your future because your parents have struggled so hard to get you where you are now. And you take all of that into consideration and you carry that on your shoulder. And in both your novels, in Aisha at Last and Hannah Khan Carries On, I see the female leads also carrying that on their shoulders. And we've talked about what it's like to be ambitious for yourself in non-traditional ways and what cultural factors you may have to buck against or go against to be as ambitious as you want to be, though it may be considered unseemly and unfeminine to have such naked ambition. So tell us a little bit about that. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, I know we've had this conversation so often, and it's taken the form of so many, the basis of so many conversations that you and I have had, and we've had with our other fellow writer friends. And I think it's one of the themes that I'm going to be exploring in every single book that I write. Like, even my third book is kind of already shaping into, talking about ambition in a more obvious way. And I know I can speak for myself, but I always wanted to be a writer, but I never saw myself represented through other, South Asian Muslim writers in Canada. And so I didn't even know what the kind of the road towards being a published writer would look like, or if it could even be a job, right? I know lots of doctors and lawyers and
right. We had no mentors to show us the way.
Yeah, so that was part of it. But then the other aspect of this is, and as I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, like being the child of immigrants. Like, our parents moved here for a reason. And when I told my dad, who, by the way, is like my number one fan and is super supportive, and probably bought like 50 copies of Hannah Khan. But when I told him, when I was a teenager, and I said I want to be a writer, he was like, Beta, that's a good hobby. But you have to get a day job. And I'm not even angry about that, because I understand where he was coming from. He was just worried. He was like, how are you going to support yourself? How are you going to, pay the bills, because we're immigrants. We don't have a safety net. We don't have, like family money that we can fall back on. We don't have family connections that are so wide and deep that you can kind of pull on in order to become a starving artist. And he himself didn't see those models ahead of him. So it was really hard for me to sort of lean into my ambition. And I was too scared to do it for many, many years. And to that end, I never told anyone that I wanted to be a writer when I was an adult. It wasn't until I was on my maternity leave with my second son. So I was almost 30 when I was like, okay, if I say I want to be a writer and this is my dream, I know this is not going to happen overnight. I have responsibilities. Let me start taking baby steps. And that's when I started working towards it. So, everything that has happened in the past few years has actually been the product of 15 years of work. Like
That's what they say. There's no such thing as an overnight success.
No
You
such
just
thing.
haven't seen the struggle behind the success.
Yeah. But that whole idea of ambition and being ambitious for ourselves is something that I'm still kind of struggling with, because I don't have a model in front of me of what this looks like, and I'm kind of making it up as I go along. But woohoo, I'm a bestseller today. So,
Are you afraid to try anything? Is there something you wouldn't do?
No, you know what? I think my problem is guarding my time. I actually say yes to everything. So
Well, it's that cycle between promotion and wanting to speak about your book so people actually read the book, and then realizing you have to be in that little cave to actually create anything.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I think the hard part is what we were talking about earlier when we got started with this interview, the difference between writing a debut novel and your second novel. My first novel, I didn't have any promotion, right? Like, nobody knew who I was. So I was just toiling in
Obscurity.
In obscurity. Yeah, in beautiful, blissful obscurity. And so when my second book came out, now I'm still working as a high school teacher. I'm still writing for the Toronto Star, and now I have to write a third book, which I'm working on, I promise, and also promote the first book. So there's just so many hats. But I'm also very grateful to be able to be in this situation. So I'm not complaining. I'm happy to work harder.
Well, that's wonderful. And I mean, I have a million more questions that I could ask you, but I see that there's at least seven questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to try and get some of those questions to you. And let me just pull that up and get moving with that. Oh, here's a great one. This question is from Erin Hand. What advice would you give to a teacher struggling to find the mental space to write or for other artistic passions, while balancing the responsibilities of teaching, specifically teaching in a pandemic? P.S. I am on chapter 32 of Hannah Khan and only started it yesterday. Cannot put it down.
Oh, thank you so much, Erin. I'm so glad that you're enjoying it. I completely relate to this so much. I think it's really, really difficult to write and to teach. And teaching is a job that just takes over your entire world. Like I know when I was teaching last year when the pandemic first happened, I was up until like 11 p.m. lesson planning, marking, just trying to make sure that I was doing, and especially if you're a conscientious teacher, someone who really feels a lot of responsibility for your students, it is a job that will burn you out if you're not careful. So the advice that I would give you, and this is what I did for myself. Like I said, I knew for myself that because I had so many responsibilities and so many hats back when I was on mat leave with my son, I just decided that I was going to start really small. So on my way home from work, this is what I would do for many years. After my maternity leave was done and I returned to work, I had two babies at home. I was working full time as an English teacher. On my way home from work, I would just stop off at a coffee shop. Back when we could do that, of course. And for 45 minutes, twice a week, I would sit down and I would force myself to write. And it was just chipping away at it slowly. Writing a book is not something that it's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. That's what they always say about writing books. And I knew going into this, that it would take a really, really long time. And I would really concentrate on it over the holidays, the school holidays. So Christmas, the Christmas holidays, March break, weekends. I love to sleep in, but my husband knew I was serious because I started waking up at ridiculously early times and writing. It didn't last for very long because I love to sleep too much. And summer holidays, and year in and year out, I just kept working on it. And then a story somehow came together, and that was Aisha at Last. What really, really helped, however, was I think I was about 6.5 years into drafting Aisha at Last. And I knew that I could feel it in my bones that I was at that point. So this is my first novel. I was at the point where I just need a last little push. So what I did was I actually took an unpaid sabbatical from teaching, which if you're a public school teacher, you can do. You can apply for a leave, you can do a 4/5. There's lots of things you can do in Ontario. I saved up the money and I was like, I need a year off and I need to really focus on this. I could have just kept going and I think Aisha at Last would still be published, but it might have taken another 2 or 3 years. But I needed that propulsive push. So I took a year off. And the funny thing is, the book was mostly written, and the final draft of it was mostly written. That year off from September to June, I finished the final draft early October, and then I spent the rest of the year educating myself on how to get published. So I think Uzma, I met you at that point. So
That's right.
yeah, you read my book and you gave me some really good feedback. I revised it a couple times. I got an agent, and the agent took the book out on submission, and alhamdulillah, it was published. It was bought by June 30th, which is so ironic, the last day of school, 2017, and it was published a year later by HarperCollins. So that's what I did. Yeah. Good luck. Don't give up. It really, really helps to have a writing community. Like Uzma and I are critique partners. Not sure what I would do without Uzma. I have a couple
Same
of other.
Not sure what I would do without Uzma, but yes, it really helps to have community.
It really helps. Yeah.
So the next question is from Lauren Brecken, and Lauren says, not a question, but a comment. I enjoy reading your column in the Toronto Star. I do too. It's hilarious, and was thrilled to read of this interview. I can't wait to read the book. Should I wait to read your first one, or do they stand alone?
Oh no, they're standalone novels for sure. I think I just included a brief shout out to Aisha at Last. There's a couple cameos in Hannah Khan Carries On. They're set in the same close knit Toronto, Scarborough community, but they are not related to each other at all.
And then we have an anonymous question. In between COVID and all the dark things that are happening in the world right now, oh, I love this question. It's so important to find pockets of joy. What are some things you do to relax or find joy during these strange times?
Oh, it's such a good question. And you know what? I've been feeling the darkness too. I know I sometimes I pick up the phone and I call Uzma, or I'll call another friend and kind of complain and moan about my life. And for me, I didn't realize this. I always thought I was a total introvert, but the pandemic made me realize how much of I miss little things like small talk, making small talk with my colleagues. Like seeing my students' faces, all the things that I thought I'd be fine living without, I'm really, really not. So I've been really struggling. And it's really hard to be creative and to kind of dig into your creativity when you're feeling like this. So for self-care, I do things like I read a lot of romance novels. That brings me a lot of joy. And it's also just good because I write romance novels. So doing a little bit of research into my field as well. I started going for walks almost every day, more now that the weather has finally turned in Toronto. So before this session, I went for a walk around the neighborhood with my husband. And the other thing is I'll take like a long bath. I'm a bath person, so I'll do that. And I started exercising. I never used to exercise before, which I know sounds ridiculous. I'm a grown woman, I should, but I never did. But now because I'm home so often, I started actually, using my elliptical machine as something other than a laundry hanger. So those are the things I do.
All right, we have another great comment here, Uzma. I loved your piece in the Toronto Star in defense of rom-coms. What are some great rom-coms to read next after devouring Hannah Khan Carries On?
Oh, this is such a great question. What am I reading? Oh, there's a great one that's coming out at the end of April. It's called Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Sutanto. And it's got a great premise. It's sort of Crazy Rich Asians meets Weekend at Bernie's. I'm really excited to read that. Our mutual friend, SK Ali, will be publishing her sequel to it's a YA novel, Saints and Misfits, but her second novel, the follow-up to that, is called Misfits in Love. I'm really excited about it because it's basically set in like a big desi wedding, and like the main character is again like a Muslim hijab wearing teenager, but she has like 3 guys who are interested in her. So it's going to be so much fun. That comes out at the end of May. So those are the 2 things that I would recommend.
I want to throw in there that I love everything that Nalini Singh writes. I'm not sure that it qualifies as rom-com, but it's great.
God.
It's great paranormal or urban fantasy romance.
Yes, agreed.
Since Hannah works, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying Nalini gets all the love, 100%.
Oh yes, I'm in love with pretty much all of her heroes. I can't pick a favorite. Kind of like Khalid and Aiden too. Okay, someone's asking, since Hannah works in a poutineery, what is your favorite kind of poutine? Haha.
I mean, I like the classic poutine. I had one of the ideas for one of the iconic dishes in HanaCon. I'm saying iconic because I hope it becomes iconic. Excuse me, is biryani poutine. So I've never tried biryani poutine. It is not a dish, but I think over the weekend I'm going to experiment with it. So it's basically biryani with poutine on top. But I like the classic poutine. But you have to have the right cheese, right? You have to have cheese curds. You can't just put random cheese on poutine, and it has to be like good, flavorful gravy. It's really important.
Yeah, let me tell you this. I went on a couple of summers ago, before the pandemic, I went on not a camping trip, but like sort of close to a camping trip with my in-laws in the summer, and a place where we could canoe and whatnot. And I'm not an outdoorsy type of girl at all. And they're a really healthy, exercise-focused family. So there's me, the outsider, and we're all going, and suddenly there's this little stand that sells poutine. And I'd been in the States forever. I hadn't had poutine since I was in school in Ottawa. So I looked at them all, and they're like, "Oh, you go ahead in the canoe, I'll catch up." And then I just like ordered myself a little serving of poutine and just sat there blissfully but secretly eating it
So
while they continued to focus on making homemade salads with homemade dressing. And I was just a little bit guilty, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I really enjoyed the return to it in Hannah Khan Carries On. Okay, we have a great question here from Erin Hand that says, what is your process? I want to know the answer to this too. What is your process for writing such enticing banter between a will they, won't they couple?
I think the best thing to do is to just really get into your character's head. So what I do before I start writing is I open up a Word doc and I write down where I think the story is going to go. So like sort of a plot outline. I really spend a lot of time thinking about the themes that I want to explore. And then I spend a long time thinking about my characters, specifically if I'm writing a rom-com, my two love interests. And I really try to get inside their heads to the extent that they kind of start following me around and talking to me, which is a little bit weird.
Well, someone's got to talk to you on those long walks that you take by
Exactly.
yourself, right?
But no, just knowing who they are, their personality, what do they like, what are they afraid of, what are they scared to do, what do they hope for, what do they wish for, what are their dreams, who do they hate, who do they love, who was their childhood bully, like knowing all these things that won't necessarily make it into the book, but you know who this person is. And that's the process that I use to kind of sink down and capture their voice. So I mean, obviously you're writing fiction, and fiction is sort of a stylized version of real life, right? People in the real world aren't really so good at banter. They try to be, but they're not.
Yes, I would say mine with my husband consists of things like pass me the remote.
Exactly, right? Like we don't really live in those worlds. So when you can capture the essence of these characters and their voice because you know them so well, that's where banter starts. And of course, it doesn't just come out. It's the result of many drafts of writing, like what you're witnessing, what you're reading in your hand, and possibly hopefully reading really quickly. It took me 2 years to write, and probably 6 months before that to even start thinking about. So I always think it's so funny. It's like, Aisha, it last took me 8 years to write, and people read it in one day. And I'm like, slow down. Do you know how much work went into every single word?
Okay, we have this lovely comment from Ali Hurd that says, congratulations, Uzma, on being a Canadian bestseller. I have just started listening to the book. It is wonderful, and I can't wait to listen to the rest. I am a big radio listener. So how familiar are you with the radio industry? And who was your inspiration for Hannah's love of radio?
I love radio. I grew up listening to it. I'm a huge fan. When I was younger, I would listen to the top 40 hits, all the AM stations, and then I graduated to FM. So I'm kind of dating myself here. I started listening in the 80s and 90s. And even now I listen to CBC radio all the time, every time I'm in the car. And, anytime I need to find out something and get updates. And I've moved on a little bit to podcasts, so I'm a huge fan of podcasts, and that's where Hannah's love of podcasting comes from. I knew when I wanted to write my second novel that I wanted to put podcasts in there in some way, shape, or form. In terms of research, I did ask people that I know who do run podcasts for some help. I even hired a sensitivity reader to read, and she herself is a Muslim woman who works in the radio space as well as has made podcasts in the past. So she read my book and pointed out all the things that maybe needed to be more realistic in terms of the radio space. So that's the work that I did behind the scenes. But also, I'm a fan of radio. I'm a fan of podcasts. I love that type of narrative, long form storytelling that can be told through audio format so well.
Do you have a favorite podcast?
It changes all the time. Like I listen to a lot of the NPR ones. So Planet Money, Code Switch, I love. I started off with This American Life. Listened to some CBC ones. Alone, a Love Story was so great. The Dolly Parton's America, I finished that a couple weeks ago. So good. Really, really amazing. I listened to Script Notes, which is actually a podcast about screenwriting, but it's relevant to writing. I could go on. Lots of them.
That's a good list. I think there's some great suggestions there for Ali and for all of us. Here's a fun question. Have you thought about dream casting Hannah Khan Carries On, and who should play Hannah and Aiden and the other delightful characters if this becomes a TV show or film? Sorry, there's some cats around here, so if you see me doing weird things, I'm just petting the cats.
I haven't actually thought about it. I probably should. I actually haven't thought about who could play Hannah or Aiden. If that ever happens, then I guess I'll leave it to the experts. Uzma, do you have any ideas of who would play a good Aiden?
Okay, I don't know the actor's name, but I watched this British crime show called Marcella, and there's an Indian actor who plays kind of her supervisor at the police station. I think his first name is Ray, but I can't remember his full name. Anyway, he's super dreamy, so I would cast him as Aiden. Okay. Hannah, who would make a good? The girls are always so hard; it's impossible to find anybody. But I think, have I come up with anybody? No, sorry, I'm stumped too. We're gonna have to put our minds to this, and we're gonna have to think about why we can't name a dozen Muslim actresses or South Asian actresses off the top of our head.
That's the thing, right? We're actually working from a growing pool of people, but there's not a lot of people that we can choose from. So parents, let your kids be actors. They can star in.
If they can't be writers, let them be actors or comedians.
Right.
Jacqueline Kwa Hansen Hansen, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Does the book contain recipes? Is what Jacqueline would like to know.
Not directly. No, it doesn't contain recipes, but it does contain, if you read it, you'll get a good sense of how to make things like biryani and how to make things like chai. But I know with Aisha at Last, my US version contained recipes for chai and for parathas, but not this one, unfortunately.
I think in later editions, when you have the movie tie-in, let's say, there should definitely be a recipe for biryani poutine, even if you make it up yourself. Beth Sheridan would like to know whether you would consider doing another Austen retelling. Yay, I love this question. Like Persuasion, for example.
I love Persuasion. In fact, I actually wrote, where is it? I wrote the introduction to this version of Persuasion. I'm so proud of it. Look, it has my name on the front. Like my name beside Jane Austen is just ridiculous. It just blows my mind all the time. This is available in the United States. It is not beyond the realm of possibility. In fact, sometimes books take on a life of their own. The funny story about Aisha at Last is I didn't realize I was doing a Pride and Prejudice retelling until the 5th draft. So I have a feeling my third book might borrow from Persuasion. So we'll see what happens. But if you are interested in a great Persuasion retelling, Recipe for Persuasion by Sonali Dev is a fantastic book.
Excellent. I love getting these recs. I hope they all come up in the chat. Here's a very nice and flattering question that I very much appreciate. Both of you write beautifully within genre, Uzma's rom-coms and Asma's mysteries and fantasy series. Thank you very much, both of us are saying. Is there another genre you'd like to try writing in?
Ooh. I would love to try my hand at mystery because I love whodunits. I've read probably all of Agatha Christie's genre, and even now I really enjoy that genre a lot. So yeah, that's one thing that I would love to try my hand at. What about you, Uzma?
I would really like to write romance. I would love to write literary fiction, maybe one day publish a book of poems. And I am really, really keen to get into television. So I would like to start writing screenplays based on my books and seeing if I can do anything with them. But that's a challenge for another day. And of course, I'd like to keep on with fantasy. I'm hoping to do a spinoff to the Horizon Archive somewhere down the road, but I'm currently working on a new crime series set in Colorado called Blackwater Falls. And Uzma has been my critique partner for that from day one, as we've been bouncing ideas back and forth, because the lead character at this time is a female Muslim investigator who, for pretty painful reasons, has had to stop wearing her hijab. So I think we've had some fun talking about that and seeing where we can go. But let me tell you, Uzma writes everything beautifully, so I'm dying to see what she puts on the page next. Hint, I've read one of her plays, so I'm eager to see everything else that she does too. All right, so we have a question here, which is a good question maybe to wrap the whole thing up on so that poor Uzma can go and break her fast. What's next for Uzma Jalaluddin?
I broke my fast with water, but I can go eat. I'm going to go eat some dinner now. What's next for me? So I'm under contract. I have to write a third book, and it will be set in the same neighborhood as Aisha at Last and Hannah Khan Carries On. I like the idea of continuity of neighborhood, if not the same characters. It'll be another standalone rom-com. I'm really excited about it, but I'm not that far into it. So I don't actually know what it's about yet, because again, I'm a drafter. I know that it will be exploring the idea of female ambition within the Muslim community and what that looks like. So I'm really excited about that. And as Uzma said, I wrote a play for a Canadian cultural organization called the Silk Road Institute. And it's a rom-com. No surprise there. It's a rom-com featuring Muslim characters, and it's a bit of a farce. It was so much fun to write. That's what I spent last summer 2020, writing. And
yeah, my stomach was hurting so much from reading that play. I laughed so much. Oh, I cannot wait to see it on the stage.
It'll be so funny, and it'll be so great to see one of our stories up on stage. So hopefully once, everyone starts getting vaccinated and things start opening up again, we can actually head into production with that. So I'm really excited about that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Uzma, for sharing with us so openly and honestly and giving us so much time when you must be absolutely parched and exhausted after a long day of fasting. Happy Ramadan to you and your family. And thank you to everyone for attending and putting in your wonderful questions. It's been great to be with you. We both appreciate it very much, and we hope you will continue to join us as Uzma continues her book tour for Hannah Khan Carries On. Have a lovely evening, everybody. I hope this won't be too abrupt, but now I'm going to cut everyone off. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.